On an ordinary morning at a military base in the American South, a woman in a tattered coat walked into a commissary and was quietly ridiculed. No one knew the scar on her wrist, the coin in her pocket, or the history stitched into her jacket. What happened next would silence an entire room and rewrite what they thought they knew. Stay with us and don't forget to hit that subscribe button before we dive into today's story. The automatic doors of the Houston-based commissary slid open with a mechanical sigh as Clara Hastings stepped inside. The morning air still clung to her worn military jacket, olive green, sun-faded to a weary beige. The cuffs were frayed, the elbows thinned by years of use. A patch that once held a unit insignia had long since been stripped away, leaving only the ghost of stitching on the left breast. Her posture remained upright, straight-backed in a way that couldn't be forgotten even after retirement. Yet her right leg dragged ever so slightly with each step, a limp not dramatic enough to draw sympathy, but visible to anyone paying attention. Few did. Two young lieutenants near the entrance barely suppressed their laughter. One of them, tall and clean-shaven, nudged his friend. "Looks like someone raided the discount bin at Goodwill," he whispered. "Or maybe pulled that thing off her grandfather's attic trunk." The other snorted, "Probably trying to score a vet discount." Clara didn't flinch. She didn't look back. She just kept walking, her face unreadable, her shopping list folded neatly in one gloved hand. The commissary buzzed around her families, picking up cereal, officers on break grabbing energy drinks, retirees sharing small talk near the coffee station. Clara drifted through them like a shadow, touching items with deliberate care. She paused in front of the canned soup display, her fingers, weathered and bearing a faint surgical scar across her right wrist, traced the prices slowly. She chose 2 cans and placed them into her basket, her movements calm, precise. The limp in her step betrayed discomfort, but not weakness. She reached for a box of pasta on the top shelf, her arm extending just far enough to reveal the full length of the scar on her wrist, a relic of something no one had ever asked about. Behind her, the lieutenants lingered. "Think she ever served one?" murmured. "Probably just wears that thing to get sympathy. Stolen valor types always show up around here." The other replied, "Looks the part? That's usually enough to fool the front desk." Clara's eyes flicked to the side, catching her own reflection in the refrigerated glass. Her lips remained closed, but her hand momentarily tightened around the handle of the shopping basket. As she turned toward the next aisle, a folded photograph peeked from her jacket's inside pocket. Only a sliver of it showed 5 figures in camouflage, the edge of a helicopter, and a blurred desert horizon. She pushed it back in without a word. Clara moved on. To them, she was a woman in a thrifted coat. To her, the coat was memory stitched into fabric, a silent tribute to people who no longer had voices. She didn't need validation, but that didn't make the sting of mockery any less real. Not yet knowing, those young men had laughed at a ghost, and the ghost had simply kept walking. She didn't look back, even as their snickers faded behind her in the aisle. Clara Hastings kept walking, the weight of her basket less burdensome than the weight of their assumptions. The commissary's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, indifferent, as she made her way to the checkout counter. The line was short early enough that most shoppers hadn't arrived yet. The cashier was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, wearing a navy blue cap with faded gold lettering, "Retired Master Sergeant." His gaze, sharp despite the years, lingered on Clara's jacket as she placed her items on the conveyor belt. He didn't speak at first, but his eyes, narrowing slightly, fixed on the area above her left chest pocket where the remnants of a long-removed patch had left faint stitching, a kind of scar in the fabric. If he recognized anything, he didn't say, just scanned each item with practiced ease. Clara met his gaze briefly, her face unreadable. "That'll be $13.76, he said finally, voice neutral but not unkind. She paid in cash, counting each bill carefully from a slim, worn wallet. "Thank you," she murmured. "You have a good day, ma'am," he replied, nodding as he handed her the receipt. Clara turned, groceries in hand, and made her way toward the back of the commissary, where the base records office shared a window with customer services. The quarterly appeal with the VA was scheduled for 11 a.m. That morning, like every 3 months, she needed to verify her base address before the appointment, a bureaucratic step that never seemed to stick in the system, no matter how many times it was completed. She moved with the same quiet determination, shifting her weight slightly to favor her left leg. Her shoulder ached, but she didn't show it. The line at customer services moved slowly, as always. A civilian clerk named Alicia stood behind the glass. Young, perhaps in her 20s. Her neatly pinned bun and bright smile gave her the air of someone who still believed systems worked. When Clara stepped forward, Alicia greeted her with a rehearsed cheerfulness. "How can I help you today? I need to verify my current address for base records," Clara said, sliding a small stack of documents under the glass along with her ID. Alicia glanced at them, then frowned slightly. "Are you active duty or a dependent veteran?" Clara replied, with the patience of someone who had explained this dozens of times. "I'll need to see your veteran ID card or DD-2 form." "I don't carry those," Clara said. "My records are under special classification. I have a letter from the Department of Defense Records Office authorizing this exception." She tapped the official letter bearing seals, barcodes, and a clearance level unfamiliar to most clerks. Alicia hesitated, scanning the papers again. "I'm sorry," she said, "but this doesn't meet our standard documentation policy." "Let me get my supervisor," Clara sighed inwardly. It always came to this. Behind her, the sound of laughter reemerged too close to be coincidence. The 2 lieutenants from earlier had finished their shopping and were now loitering by the service window, sipping bottled sodas and making no effort to hide their amusement. $10 says she's working the sympathy angle for a VA bump. The taller one said, just loud enough to be heard, "Classic move." The other added, "Tattered coat, dramatic limp, mysterious, classified past what's next." A fake medal, Clara remained still, eyes ahead, even as heat rose up the back of her neck. She had endured firefights under mortar fire. She had carried a fallen teammate through wind-choked desert canyons. But this daily erosion of dignity was the battle that never ended. The supervisor arrived moments later, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses and a clipboard. She examined the documents with a practiced frown, flipping pages and occasionally typing something into the computer terminal behind the counter. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said finally. "These documents don't meet the requirements for veteran verification. Without a DD-214 or a VA card, I can't process your update." "These are the only forms I'm authorized to carry," Clara said, her voice low. "Even the VA sent me here to verify this step before my appeal." The supervisor shook her head, apologetically but firmly. "Then I suggest going back to the VA. Maybe they can update your case from their end." Clara nodded once, tucking the folder back into her jacket's inside pocket. As she did, a metallic glint briefly caught the overhead light, the edge of a challenge coin, deeply engraved. Not the kind sold in souvenir shops, but the kind given in silence after missions no one was allowed to mention. Behind her, another laugh, this time louder. "I've seen better fakes at air shows." Someone snorted. A junior specialist nearby chuckled, clearly picking up on the social cues from the lieutenants. The supervisor, now aware of the crowd forming, began to shrink from the situation. She said nothing more, simply stepped back and busied herself with paperwork. Clara turned slowly, facing the line of amused faces. She said nothing, but her shoulders straightened, even beneath the fluorescent lights, in a place where dignity was a currency tightly rationed. Clara Hastings would not beg. She would not explain. Her silence, like her coat, bore more truth than any document the system refused to accept. She gathered her groceries and walked toward the door, passing ghosts of mockery. Wrapped in uniforms that still had much to learn, she passed through the commissary doors in silence, her groceries in one hand, the weight of old wounds and new humiliation on her shoulders. Behind her, the laughter of the young officers still echoed faintly. Clara Hastings was used to being unseen, unrecognized, forgotten. But that morning was not done with her yet. She barely noticed the small group entering the building as she stepped aside instinctively. The man in the center was tall, commanding, dressed in a starched uniform bearing the weight of 4 stars. General Malcolm Grant, flanked by 2 aides. He walked with practiced purpose, eyes scanning a document in his hands while issuing clipped orders. "I need those logistics numbers recalculated by noon," he said sharply to the aide on his right. "The committee won't accept projections. I want confirmed estimates." "Yeah, sir," the aide replied, typing on a tablet. Clara shifted further out of their way, lowering her eyes with the reflexive deference that still lingered from her years of service. She turned slightly, ready to pass without notice. But something made General Grant look up. His eyes landed on her, first casually, a habit of security and awareness, then sharply, his gaze fixed on the worn outline of a shape above her heart, the patch long since frayed into obscurity. His steps halted mid-stride. The document in his hand lowered slowly as recognition took hold. The aides, caught off guard, continued 2 steps before realizing their commanding officer had frozen. They turned back, brows furrowed. "Is something wrong, sir?" But the general didn't answer. He stared at Clara's jacket like a man seeing a ghost, his expression shifting from curiosity to certainty. Then, with crisp, deliberate motion, he snapped to attention and saluted. Clara stood frozen. The moment, absurd and sacred, stretched impossibly long. The clamor of the commissary dulled into silence. The young lieutenants who had mocked her stood just within earshot, their words still fresh in the air. But now, all eyes were on the general and on her. Clara's hand rose slowly, transferring the grocery bag to her left side. Then, in a movement honed from years of discipline and muscle memory, she returned the salute. "Captain Hastings," the general said, his voice reverberating through the stunned quiet. "Echo Watch, Operation Galloway, 2002. Clara's reply came steady, clear. "Yes, sir." The aides looked between them, puzzled, but the murmurs in the crowd were growing. Soldiers nearby had stopped mid-step. Retirees stood still with coffee cups halfway raised. The lieutenant's expressions twisted from amusement to disbelief. General Grant lowered his salute. Clara did the same. "At ease, Captain," he said, though they both knew she no longer held rank. Clara gave a slight nod. "Thank you, sir." The general gestured toward the small cafe in the corner. "Walk with me." She followed him wordlessly, the sea of onlookers parting like water before them. The 2 lieutenants stepped aside quickly, their faces pale. They sat at a table tucked near the window. A young private from the cafe rushed over, nearly spilling coffee in her flustered attempt to serve them. "Black," said the general. "For both of us." When she left, he leaned forward. "I've wondered for years what became of your unit. After the debriefings, everything went dark, deeper than I could access. Triple-blind protocols." Clara nodded. "Team identity. Objectives. Even our presence in country, everything was siloed. You were my extraction team," he said. "Galloway went sideways fast. 3 birds down. We were surrounded. And then out of nowhere, you opened a corridor through that canyon. 31 of us got out because of Echo Watch." 32, Clara corrected quietly. "You forgot Lieutenant Martin. He died 6 days later from shrapnel wounds." The general nodded slowly, grief glinting behind his eyes. "You were listed as KIA. You know, at least half of Echo Watch. They told us nothing." Clara's hand drifted to the faded patch on her jacket. "Officially, we didn't exist." "Goddamn shame," he said, his voice low but charged. "You've been living in the shadows ever since, more like circling them." She replied, "My injuries were never documented properly. VA can't access classified files. Every 3 months, I come here, try to update my case. Every time, they tell me I don't exist. The general sat back, the anger behind his eyes now redirected. That ends today. He pulled a sleek phone from his jacket, tapped quickly, then paused. This is General Grant. I'm invoking Level 6 clearance on a personnel matter. Immediate review and partial declassification of all Echo Watch files related to medical operations under Operation Galloway. Yes. Priority override. Use my personal authorization Alpha 94 Foxtrot. He ended the call and set the phone down. It may take a few days, but you'll get what you need. Captain, what you deserve. Clara said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, thank you, sir. Their conversation was interrupted by footsteps. The two young lieutenants had approached, now standing stiffly at attention beside their table. Sir, the taller one said, his voice tense. Request permission to speak. General Grant glanced at Clara. She gave a faint nod. Granted, the general said. The lieutenant turned to her. Ma'am, he began. I wish to offer a sincere apology for our earlier behavior. It was inappropriate and disrespectful. We made assumptions based on appearance and spoke without knowledge. We failed to show proper respect, the second lieutenant added. We judge without understanding. We understand now. We're sorry. Clara looked at them not with scorn, but with the weary patience of someone who had seen far worse. You couldn't have known, she said softly. That was the point. The general let the silence linger before adding, a lesson worth learning early in your career. Yador, sir, they replied in unison. Return to your duties, he said. As they retreated, Clara turned back to her coffee, wrapping her fingers around the cup's warmth. I've kept my mouth shut for years, she said. Didn't think anyone would ever ask. They're asking now, the general replied. And they're finally ready to listen. The apology hung in the air like smoke, uncomfortable, lingering, but real. Clara Hastings gave the young officers a quiet nod as they walked away, their rigid backs betraying the embarrassment they tried to suppress. Beside her, General Grant took a slow sip of coffee and exhaled deeply, his gaze returning to her face. They meant it, he said, and it'll stay with them. You've just changed 2 careers. I didn't want to embarrass them, Clara replied. Just hold a mirror up. They needed to see what they were really looking at. That's more than fair, he said, setting his cup down. Most would have chewed them out. You gave them a lesson instead. She looked past him toward the commissary floor. Life had resumed its rhythm. Carts rolled by. Voices murmured. Doors slid open and shut. Yet the energy had changed. Faces that once glanced past her now lingered. Soldiers nodded respectfully. The cashier from earlier offered a small salute from behind the counter. Word spreads fast in places like this, the general remarked, following her gaze. Especially when a 4-star renders a salute in a grocery store. Clara gave a soft chuckle, the sound almost foreign in her own throat. I used to disappear in plain sight. I'd gotten used to it. He nodded. That's going to change. I've already spoken to the Joint Medical Board. They'll begin processing your case under a temporary override while we wait for declassification approval. You'll have access to full care within the week. Clara blinked. That quickly? He leaned forward. There are still delays. Yes, but there's a lot of power in the right kind of phone call. And I've made several today. She didn't reply immediately. Something within her had learned to resist hope. It always came with conditions, always asterisks. But as she looked at this man, she saw no conditions. Just a quiet resolve born of gratitude and guilt. I appreciate it, sir, not just for me, for what's left of my team. How many, he asked gently. 6 of us on paper, Clara said. Only 3 made it out. Lieutenant Way died from cancer 10 years ago. Decker took his own life in 2012. That leaves me. The general's jaw tightened. I remember Callahan, your unit leader. Never heard what happened to him. Held the perimeter while the rest of us got the diplomatic team to the backup extraction point. His last words were, "Don't come back for me." Grant closed his eyes for a brief moment. I owe my life to him. To you. She shook her head. We owed it to the mission? No, he said, his voice firm. The mission owed it to you, and we failed in that. They sat in silence for a few moments more, the weight of unsaid things settling gently around them. Then the general reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather-bound folder. This is the beginning, he said, handing it over. A proposal. I want your story, at least the parts we can share, to be included in the officer training curriculum, not as a footnote, as a case study. Clara opened the folder slowly. Inside was a draft of a lesson plan, leadership under obscured circumstances lessons from EchoWatch. You want to teach this, she asked. I want you to teach it, he corrected, or help shape how it's taught. It's not just about tactics, it's about humility, restraint, respect. Those lieutenants today multiply that by thousands. That's the audience. Clara let the pages settle in her lap. I never thought I'd be studied. That's exactly why you should be. She exhaled slowly, letting the words settle. I'll need time. Of course, he said, but I hope you'll consider it. You've earned more than silence. They stood a few minutes later. He glanced at his watch and sighed. I have to brief the Joint Chiefs. But my aide will follow up with next steps. As they parted, Clara took one last look around the commissary. A few feet away, the same lieutenant who'd mocked her hours ago was now standing near the canned goods aisle again, only this time. He wasn't laughing. He met her gaze directly, then offered a respectful nod. She returned it. It was a beginning. That afternoon, Clara drove to the VA Medical Center across base. This time, the clerk at reception greeted her by name, already aware of her newly authorized status. Within 2 hours, she had a confirmed evaluation appointment, access to a physical therapy program, and expedited documentation scheduled for processing. 2 days later, the approval notice arrived. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at it in disbelief. Years of red tape, condescension, and denial all resolved in a single page of clearance. It was more than validation. It was recognition, and maybe more for the first time in 2 decades, it was also reparation. 3 months later, Clara Hastings stepped through the same set of automatic doors that had once witnessed her humiliation. The commissary buzzed with its usual morning energy recruits shouting cadence outside, carts rolling through narrow aisles, and the distant crackle of the intercom calling for price checks. But something had changed. She wore the same jacket, now carefully cleaned and repaired. The fabric still bore the worn look of years in the field, but a new precision had returned to it, sleeves restitched, elbows patched. Most notably, the faint shadow of a patch above her heart was no longer a ghost. The emblem of EchoWatch had been restored, subdued in color, discreet in tone, but undeniable. Just beneath it gleamed a small silver pin, the Presidential Unit Citation. Recognition, sewn and pinned. As Clara moved through the entrance, the cashier, Master Sergeant Reed, retired, stood at his usual station. He looked up, saw her, and his face broke into a quiet smile. Morning, Lieutenant Hastings, he said, with a respectful nod. Clara smiled back. Morning. Master Sergeant. It had taken time, but names had returned. Rank had returned, not as relics, but as acknowledgments. She picked up a shopping basket and walked the same route she had so many times before, through the canned goods, past the dairy case, down the dry pasta aisle. Her limp had improved slightly, thanks to the new therapy program. Her right shoulder still twinged if she reached too far, but the pain had softened. She could now hold her grocery bag without shifting weight every 5 steps. Near the coffee display, she caught sight of one of the 2 lieutenants from that day. The taller one, Lieutenant Harmon, was alone, scanning a line of soup cans with furrowed concentration. He looked up as she passed and froze momentarily. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He took a step forward, then another, stopping respectfully a few feet from her. His posture was more composed now, less arrogance, more intention. Lieutenant Hastings, he greeted, standing straight. She turned to face him. Lieutenant Harmon. I wanted to let you know, he said, your case is now part of the official leadership curriculum. General Grant personally introduced it. It's being taught at the academy and in officer development seminars. Clara raised an eyebrow. That's so, he nodded. They don't share all the classified details, of course, but they teach your story to remind us what service really means, what it looks like when it doesn't come with medals or ceremonies. Clara considered that. Good lessons, she said, hard-earned. I've taken them to heart, Harmon added, his voice quieter. More than I can say. She gave him a small nod. We all learn from somewhere. Mistakes teach as much as manuals. He stood a little taller. Thank you for that, ma'am, and for your service. Clara watched as he turned and disappeared down the cleaning supplies aisle. She continued on. At the freezer section, another uniformed figure approached, this time a young woman, barely in her mid-20s. Nervous energy surrounded her like static. Her lieutenant bars gleamed, and a small intelligence insignia was stitched neatly above her pocket. Excuse me, the woman said, stepping into Clara's line of sight. Are you Lieutenant Hastings from Echo Watch? Clara didn't answer right away. She scanned the young officer's face, sharp eyes, controlled breath, the tight grip of someone standing before a hero they weren't sure they deserved to meet. I am, Clara said finally. The young woman straightened and saluted. Lieutenant Sarah Mercer, 103rd Military Intelligence Battalion. Clara returned the salute with muscle memory, her movements smooth despite years of disuse. At ease, Lieutenant. What can I do for you? Mercer cleared her throat. I've been studying the Galloway extraction. The declassified portions, your techniques, particularly the fallback corridor maneuver, are now part of our advanced training. It's foundational. I was wondering if you'd consider speaking to my platoon sometime, even within classification limits. Hearing it directly from you would mean more than I can describe. Clara hesitated. For so long, silence had been her default, but something in Mercer's eyes, earnest, unguarded, felt familiar. It was the same fire she remembered in Callahan's team, in herself, back when she was young enough to believe the impossible was merely difficult. I'd be honored, Clara said, so long as we stick to what's cleared. Mercer smiled broadly. Yes, ma'am. I'll coordinate through your contact. They exchanged information. Clara watched her walk away, heart quietly stirring in a way it hadn't in years. Not just pride, but continuity. The work they had done, the things they had sacrificed, would not vanish in sealed files or forgotten corridors. As she reached the checkout, Master Sergeant Reed greeted her again, this time with a small gesture toward her jacket. Good to see that patch getting the respect it's always deserved, he said. Strange, isn't it? Clara replied. Being seen again. He nodded. My nephew's in the academy. Says they're finally teaching about what not to overlook. Your story's part of that, even if they can't say the name. Clara paid, thanked him, and walked toward the exit. The sun outside was brighter than usual. A group of young soldiers marched past the commissary doors. As she stepped through, a few of them glanced her way. Their postures shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Shoulders straightened. Eyes followed her, not with confusion, but with recognition. Not everyone knew the story, but enough did. And for Clara Hastings, that was more than she'd ever expected. The sun caught the edge of her restored unit patch as Clara Hastings stepped into the courtyard outside the commissary. The breeze tugged gently at her jacket, but this time it carried no mockery, only light. The acknowledgement that had once seemed impossible was now her quiet companion. And yet, the journey wasn't over. A familiar voice called from across the square. Lieutenant Hastings. General Grant approached with a measured stride, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. He looked less formal than usual, but his expression carried purpose. We found Specialist Raymond's family, he said without preamble. His daughter. She's 26 now, Grew up thinking he died in a training accident. Clara's breath caught. Raymond had been their youngest, barely out of high school when he joined Echo Watch. He'd maintained comms during the entire Galloway extraction, even as the radios failed and static overwhelmed every channel. She never knew. Grant continued. Until now. With the partial declassification, we can finally correct the record. The Defense Department has approved a posthumous Silver Star. The ceremony's next month. I'd like you to be there. Clara nodded slowly. Of course, I'd be honored. She asked if anyone from her father's team was still alive. He said quietly, I think it would mean a great deal to her to meet you. Clara didn't reply right away. She was picturing Raymond's nervous grin, the way he'd double-check every wire before each mission, the joke he'd told in the helicopter to calm them all. None of them remembered it now, only how it made them laugh in a moment when laughing seemed impossible. She deserves the truth, Clara finally said, even if some of it stays locked away. Grant placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. That's why I came to find you. There's something else. We're building a new training program for high-risk extraction units. I want your input, your experience. Not theory, lived knowledge. Clara blinked. You want me to teach, I want you to shape the next generation, he said. What you've done, what your team did, it shouldn't vanish into redacted reports and memory. It should live. She didn't answer right away. For years, her voice had been buried under silence and erasure. But now, a new path was unfolding. Not as a soldier in the field, but as a guide in the shadows of legacy. I'll think about it, she said. Grant smiled. That's all I ask. Later that week, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror, straightening her jacket. The insignia caught the light just right, as did the pin beneath it. They weren't for decoration, they were testimony. She stepped outside, passing young recruits who paused, instinctively straightening as she walked by. No salute was exchanged, but their eyes held something more enduring respect born not of symbols, but of truth. Clara Hastings had once walked alone, invisible. Now, she walked with history, and it finally had her name.